Haggai today again. Chapter 1. We'll make it a little farther than verse 1 this week. If you have your Bibles, you can turn there with me. Haggai chapter 1. While you're turning there looking for that, I'll share a part of my childhood with you. I recall often growing up that by the time I was big enough, really, like literally, physically big enough to either push a mower or to actually push the pedals on the riding mower, my dad and my grandpa had me taking care of the yard. That became my responsibility. I didn't understand the grief that I gave them about mowing the yard until now that I'm having kids of my own and mine are getting close to that age and just asking them to do things. So my dad would ask me to mow the yard. Maybe he was going out of town. Maybe he was working and he said, I want you to mow the yard today. Or if he was going out of town, he would give me a list of chores. Usually the yard is included in that. But I specifically remember the yard for whatever reason. And so he would tell me, hey, I want you to take care of this. Get the yard mowed. And I would say, okay. And he would go to work. He would go about his day, his business, and whatever it was, or he would go out of town. And more often than not, at least for a long time it seems, that he would either come home before I thought he would come home. He would come home from work early, or he would come home from a trip early. Or maybe it wasn't early at all. Maybe he was coming home at the right time. And he would get home and he would find that I had not completed what he asked me to do. Any of you ever done that? Your parents tell you to do something when you were a child, and you said, yeah, I'll do it. And then in your mind, I'll do it when I feel like doing it. When I get ready to do it, I need to do it. I would do that all the time. And my dad would be so angry. I can remember being so angry. And I didn't understand that. It didn't make sense to me then. Now that I have kids, it makes perfectly good sense. I ask them to do something, and I expect them that they're going to do that. And then I will return. They've not done it. Why did you not do it? I never intended to not mow the yard. I was going to mow the yard because he told me to. But I had other things that I wanted to do. I wanted to play with my friends. I wanted to ride my bike. I wanted to sit and watch TV. I wanted to play video games or whatever it was. But I had other things that I wanted to tend to, and they took priority over what my dad told me. I was going to obey, but my obedience was postponed at best. And I think what we see in this particular section as we look today, we're going to see a nation that had postponed obedience. And postponed obedience really is consistently an issue of the sinful human heart. It's really an issue of where we place our own priorities over God's. This is the issue that we'll see Haggai calls to attention for the nation of Israel, the Hebrew people. So that's what we're going to look at today. Now, we went through last week a lot of history. We're going to go through a little bit more today, mostly kind of reiterating some of what I said, but I'm not going to cover as large of time periods. We're going to cover a smaller time period. But one of the things that I want to do, and I made the statement last week, is you can take the prophets, the prophet of Haggai, you can take the prophets and essentially kind of overlay them over some other books. 2 Kings in particular, 2 Chronicles in particular, Ezra, Nehemiah. Daniel covers the period of the Babylonian exile. Daniel's in the middle of that. Jeremiah is talking about leading up to this. We're going to use a passage from Jeremiah here in just a minute. And we see several references I mentioned already, Ezra. But you can take these prophets and overlay them over this time period in Israel's history. What was happening then? Let me read verse 1 to you, and we'll pause there briefly. Haggai chapter 1, verse 1. In the second year of King Darius, on the first day of the 6th month, the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, the governor of Judah, and to Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. So, if you remember from last week, and if not, I'm going to remind you, we're around 520 BC. Okay, 520 BC, we're looking around August, September time frame of the year. Darius has been in charge now for 2 years. It refers to Darius. It doesn't refer to a Israelite king because they had none. There was not an Israelite king. Darius was in charge. These were Israelites living under foreign rule, under a foreign leader. Okay. So what led up to that? What got us there? Around. Let me look at this. Make sure I tell you right. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon laid siege to Jerusalem, to the temple. He destroyed the temple around 587, 586 BC. And some of the other passages in Scripture record this for us. So look briefly, if you want to turn, we're going to be on the screen, 2 Kings chapter 25. We're going to look at verses 8 through 12. Happening in Jerusalem. On the 7th day of the 5th month, which was the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar, this is around 587, 586 BC, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, entered Jerusalem. He burned the Lord's temple, the king's palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. He burned down all the great houses. The whole Chaldean army with the captain of the guards tore down the walls surrounding Jerusalem. Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guards, deported the rest of the people who remained in the city, the deserters who had defected to the king of Babylon, and the rest of the population. But the captain of the guards left some of the poorest of the land to be vine dressers and farmers. Okay, so 587, 586, Nebuchadnezzar finally pushes all the way through Israel, destroys Jerusalem, destroys the temple, tears it down, tears down the walls, destroys the city, tears down houses, and completely lays waste to everything. Okay? There's nothing left. And people die, people are deported. He takes most of them back to his own kingdom, to Babylon, and then the poorest of the poor are left there. They're left there with nothing. So not only were the structures destroyed, Jeremiah 32 tells us that it's beyond just the structures of the city. Let's look at this one. Jeremiah 32 says, "Fields will be bought in this land about which you are saying." Okay, they're talking about this land, what has just happened. It's a desolation without people or animals. It has been handed over to the Chaldeans. And we're talking scorched earth. They destroyed everything. Nebuchadnezzar and his people from Babylon come in and completely take over and wipe out Israel. They take Israel captive. Take them out to Babylon. There's nothing left. So what's left is not good for anything. There's not human beings, there's not animals. It's completely destroyed. So this is what has taken place. Now we go several decades forward. Look with me in Ezra chapter 1. Last week I read to you a passage from 2 Chronicles. Back to the last chapter of 2 Chronicles. If you turn the page to Ezra chapter 1, you see basically the very same account here. It says, "In the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken through Jeremiah, the Lord roused the spirit of King Cyrus to issue a proclamation throughout his entire kingdom and to put it in writing. Nebuchadnezzar destroys Jerusalem around 587 BC. 538 BC, King Cyrus of Persia now comes in to take over, to overthrow Nebuchadnezzar's regime, his empire. Verse 2, this is what King Cyrus of Persia says. The Lord, the God of the heavens, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth and has appointed me to build him a house at Jerusalem in Judah. Any of his people among you, may his God be with him, and may he go to Jerusalem in Judah and build the house of the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who is in Jerusalem. Let every survivor, wherever he resides, be assisted by the men of that region with silver, gold, goods, and livestock, along with a freewill offering for the house of God in Jerusalem. Covers several decades, 587, we're now in 538. People of Israel have been living as foreigners, as refugees, deported under foreign rule, foreign land, nothing really of their own. Now, a new king is taken over, and God is using this king, again a pagan king, two pagan kings. Nebuchadnezzar wipes Israel out, takes them away. God now uses King Cyrus, a pagan king of Persia, to send them back. Now, I want to pause there for just a second, just briefly, to address all that's happening in our society right now. It's easy to get caught up in all the hysteria surrounding politics, the upcoming election, and all of this, all the things that are going on. But when we look at these accounts, when we read through the history of Israel, we see that God has used a pagan king to remove Israel from its land, to discipline his people, to bring judgment on his people, and then he returns to them through not a holy man, but through another pagan king. Now this took decades, and we're going to see a couple of more decades ultimately as we go through the timeline here. But if the God that we serve is able to accomplish his purposes, regardless of who is sitting at the head of a kingdom or the head of an empire, then we as believers in our society today have nothing to worry about what is coming next within our country. Does that make sense? We don't have to fear that. Now, that doesn't mean it might not come without great pain, without great turmoil, without heartache. It might not come without great persecution, regardless of which side winds up in office, regardless of what takes place in our society. But we can trust this. We can trust that God's purposes are going to be fulfilled, regardless of who is in charge. God is far greater, has far more power than any president, than any civic leader, than any governor, than any Supreme Court justice, than any ruler of any kind. God is in charge of his creation. And what God wills will come to pass. What we're responsible for then is following him in faith and obedience. Faith and obedience. We keep coming back to these two basic ideas, Troy, and everything that we go through as we teach through scriptures. Faith or belief and obedience. That's what God has taught us. So this all has been happening in the history of Israel. Now we find ourselves here in verse 1 in the year 520. Tell you what, before I read that, let me read another passage from Ezra. Chapter 4, verse 24. You can trace some of this along here in Ezra. 538 BC is the first section. He sends them back. It probably takes a couple of years for the people of Israel to get back to work. They've kind of been released from captivity in some sense. They're still under foreign rule, but they're allowed to go back to their homeland and to build the temple. Cyrus has decreed it so. The king has said, go back and build a temple to your God. That your God is using me to accomplish this. And so they go back. There's probably a great deal of excitement, a rush to get back. And over the course of a couple of years, as large groups of people travel back to Israel, they begin to build a foundation. They build a foundation rather quickly, but then it comes to a halt. There's some opposition to the work that they're doing. They kind of stop on that. Then if you look at Ezra chapter 4, verse 24, it's going to relate to exactly where we're at today in Haggai. Now the construction of God's house in Jerusalem had stopped and remained at a standstill until the second year of the reign of King Darius of Persia. That's Haggai 1. But when the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, son of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel who was over them, Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, son of Jozadak, began to rebuild God's house in Jerusalem. The prophets of God were with them, helping them. See, all this overlaps as you're looking at the story of Scripture, as you're looking at the story of the Hebrew people, the Israelites, as we look at the prophets, we overlay that onto other portions of Scripture to get a full understanding of what's happening. They went back, they returned from exile, they began building, they got a little opposition, so they paused, and they probably paused for a moment, and then they just kind of stayed paused. Here's what's next. Haggai says this in chapter 1, verse 2. The Lord of armies says this. These people say, the time has not come for the house of the Lord to be rebuilt. The word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to live in your paneled houses, while this house lies in ruin? Now the Lord of armies says this. Think carefully about your ways. You have planted much, but harvested little. You eat, but never have enough to be satisfied. You drink, but never have enough to be happy. You put on clothes, but never have enough to get warm. The wager puts his wages into a bag with a hole in it. Now I want to look at this and just kind of walk through this verse by verse for just a few moments. In verse 2, we see that Haggai jumps right into it. There's not a long discourse. Haggai says, this is what the Lord says. The Lord of armies, or the Lord of hosts. Now, the Hebrew word for host in the Old Testament means army, either in reference to a human army preparing for conflict or to a heavenly gathering of angels. It's used in that way. And it can also be used to refer to the sun, the moon, the stars as the host of heavens. So it could be the Lord of armies, or the Lord of hosts, or maybe the Lord Almighty. This was usually referred to often in the Old Testament in referring to God in kind of a warrior type way. But here as we get into Haggai, after decades of exile, it seems less to be about this warrior king, this warrior God, and more simply about the sovereignty of God. The God sovereign over all things. And really this expression kind of serves to remind the people, as the prophet uses this, his audience, that God is in control, that he knows what is happening, that he's about all that is happening. He's involved in all of these human affairs. It says the Lord of hosts, or the Lord of armies says this. These people. Who are these people? The Israelites. These people. Why does he say my people? This is his nation. These are his people. But here it says these people. He uses the same language God does in Isaiah as well. These people. There's a sense of kind of condemnation, a sense of contempt as the prophet speaks this. The Lord of hosts says this. These people. Who are these people? These people say this. The audience, either the two, Zerubbabel or Joshua, or the nation as a whole, as they hear these words, they understand that what the prophet Haggai is saying is not something of encouragement and love. Oh, the Lord of hosts says this. You guys have been fantastic. He loves you, as people. Instead, the Lord of hosts says this. These people say. So they would understand as the prophet speaks, as he stands before them, that he's bringing a message that's not really going to warm their hearts. But that's not what they need. It says, these people say. Now this kind of clues us in as we look at this, as you read this can kind of clue you into the fact that these people say, it's something that they're continually saying. Not that these people once said, or these people have said at one time, but these people say. This is what they believe. They continue to say. They say this over and over again. And they say that the time has not come for the house of the Lord to be rebuilt. They say that the time for the house of the Lord has not come to be rebuilt. So when I read this week and spent time with this, I continually kept thinking about the time, or the multiple times with my own dad, where I said, yeah, Dad, I'll do that. I'm going to take care of that. I'll get it. I would say that I was going to do it, and I intended to do it, but I would do it in the right time. In my time. My own time. As it fit into my busy schedule as a small child. Not when he wanted it, but when I wanted it. A reminder of this, again, is that people are saying the time has not come for the house of the Lord to be rebuilt. So this is kind of the initial claim that the Lord is making. Verse 3 says the word of the Lord came to the prophet Haggai. Again, this is not Haggai sharing his own opinion. This is not conjecture by Haggai. This is Haggai being used as a prophet, as a messenger, as a conduit for God's message that will be presented to the people through the person and the personality of Haggai. These are the words of the Lord. Is it a time for you yourselves to live in your paneled houses while this house lies in ruins? Is it time for that? Now, this idea of paneled houses could be kind of understood a couple of different ways. One just maybe a house that has a roof, essentially. While the Lord's house, referring to the temple, lies in ruins. Most seem to think that it's a little bit more specific than that. The Hebrew people were building houses. These paneled houses refers to they were making it nice, comfortable homes. Maybe a little extravagant. Yet the Lord's house, there's nothing. There's a foundation. That's it. Now, Haggai, or the Lord, is not necessarily condemning the style of their homes, or that their homes are even extravagant in the first place. But the issue that the Israelites have raised, and continually they say, is that it's not time yet. It's not time. In the right time. They may have even used this in spiritual type language. In the Lord's time, we'll accomplish that task. You've probably heard somebody almost be kind of spiritual about timing before. You may have done this yourself. There's times where I know that I make statements like this. It's just not the right time. When God makes His time known, then we'll do this. Then I'll do this. In God's timing. This is likely how the people are speaking. It's not that they weren't ever going to do it. Just they weren't ready to do it yet. They don't know exactly when it's going to happen, but there's other things that they need to take care of. They're concerned about their own homes. And it's not just that they get a home up. Now that they got their home built and roof put over their home, they're making really nice homes. In the Lord's house, it's not by mistake that Haggai is using this word, or that the Lord is using this word, not Haggai. That he refers to their home that they live in as a house, and he refers to the temple as a house. It's almost a play on words of what's happening. Your house is built and extravagant, while mine lies in ruins. Is it time for that? Is that right? Is your comfort more important over my dwelling? Your dwelling place, does that take priority over the Lord's dwelling place? This is what He's laying before them. Is it time? Is it time for you yourself to live in your paneled houses while this house lies in ruins? Can you just imagine that? Put yourself in this spot for a minute. Imagine all that's happened. You've been removed, or maybe you weren't even removed. Chances are you weren't in Israel when Nebuchadnezzar first took over. Or if you were, now you're getting a little older in life. Maybe you were born in Babylon, and now you've come back to this place that your parents or your grandparents talked about. And there's still not a lot. We've worked to get our home. We have to have a place to live when we get there. So when we get building our home, we worked on the temple, and we got the foundation set for it. But we received this opposition, and it stopped all of our work. It stopped all of our progress. And so all that pause is happening, all that natural thing that has occurred takes place. We're going to work on our own home. You know, it's interesting during this pandemic. It's been interesting to see the businesses that have struggled and that have had a hard time staying open, and the ones that have thrived. One of the places that has done really well are your Home Depot, Lowe's, those type of stores. Because since people have been unable to do the things that they normally do, they have found this a great time to go work on their own. I've done a little of this. Go to Lowe's to pick something up, and they're out. Why are we out? Because everybody's working on their own. I'm not saying the pandemic is related to this specifically, but we can kind of understand what that's like. There's a natural pause in life. The thing that we were working on, the thing that we were doing, it's come to a halt for one reason or the other. Here in this particular case, there's been opposition to what they're doing. So, all right, we can handle that. We'll roll the punches. We're going to work on our own. And we're going to build it up. We're going to make it nice. And chances are by this point, we're 15, 16 years into our return from exile. The economy's starting probably to pick back up. Their farms are starting to produce again. Things are happening in the city, yet they're still under foreign rule. They do have a civic leader. He's the governor, kind of appointed. Reports to Persia. They've got a religious leader in Joshua. But they're not really going. Is it time? Now the Lord of armies says in this verse 5, think carefully about your ways. Consider your ways carefully. I want you to reflect on what has been happening, and He lays it before them. You've planted much, the harvest is little. You eat, but never have enough to be satisfied. You drink, but never have enough to be happy. Put on clothes, but never have enough to get warm. The wage earner puts his wages into a bag with a hole in it. You got a piggy bank. It's a John Deere truck, an old John Deere truck we found when my mom was moving out here. We were going through storage, and I came across a whole box of stuff. It's a piggy bank. It's full. It's got all kinds of old coins, just regular coins, pennies, nickels, whatever, all in this piggy bank. And I'm carrying it. I was kind of excited. I found it. I remember it was in my room most of my childhood, or at least a large portion of my childhood, and I would constantly be putting money in it. But I had forgotten that at some point or another, I had lost the bottom of it. There's a bottom piece where you can open it and you can get your money out. So I was walking across the yard, my mom's house in Kentucky, getting ready to move her out here. And I realized something hits my foot, and I look, well, there's a coin. I must have dropped it. I must have came out. I continue walking, and I notice I'm dropping more coins. Now, this wasn't my real money. This was just change. Most of it was, some of it was even collectibles. But I realized I put this money in here as I'm walking across the yard, the thing that I put my money in, I'm losing it. This is what the Lord is telling these people. This is what He's telling the Hebrew people. You've planted much, but harvested little. Why is that, Israel? You eat, but you never have enough to be satisfied. You've been working, but you plant, but you don't ever have enough food. You eat, but you're never satisfied. Why is that, Israel? What's happening? You drink, but you never have enough to be happy. Why, Israel? Put on clothes, but you never have enough to get warm. Why is that? What's going on? The Lord is making very clear that you have said time and time again that it's not time yet. You've chosen to make your time and your efforts and your comfort and your desires a priority over what I place your own home over the priority of the Lord's home. And therefore, these things that you're doing, you plant, but you don't have enough. You eat, but you're never satisfied. It's not enough to fill you up. You drink, but you never have enough to really be happy. You can't get warm. You have clothes, but it's not quite enough. You're doing all this. You're putting all this work and this effort into your own things, and it's not enough. Why? Because you placed yourself in priority over me. It's postponed obedience. And we're going to get to it. But it's the right time. God says you need to think carefully about your ways. This isn't an accident that these things happen. It's not coincidence. It's not by mistake. What is taking place is a direct result of my activity in your life as a nation, as a people. I had you removed from the land. I brought you back to the land. You had a clear task of what you needed to do. You knew exactly what needed to be done. It was declared to you through this king. You were returned for this purpose, to build the temple, to rebuild the temple. My house, my dwelling, and you neglected it. You refused. Chose to pursue something else. So the reason you're living this way is not by chance. You're living this way because I'm in control. You need to think carefully about your ways. You need to consider what has happened. You need to consider what you've been pursuing. You need to consider what has been most important in your life. You need to consider what your priorities are. The Lord of hosts, the Lord of armies, the Lord Almighty says to think carefully about your ways. Now we're going to see some good things actually happen in this. Haggai is kind of unique in that it's one of a few of the prophets where we see restoration take place. But in this moment, at this time, as Haggai is preaching to the people, as he's declaring this message to the people, I got to imagine this is a solemn moment. I can only compare it to when my father would come home and say, well, salt with the gardens. Yeah, Dad, I was going to do it. I'll go do it now for you. Well, I already told you to do it. You were already supposed to have this done. Yeah, I know that. I'll get it. I'm sorry. I was going to do it. I know that you're Dad, and I know that I listen to you and I respect you. I was going to do it. I really was. I just hadn't done it yet. Let me go right now. That wasn't a good feeling as a child. That wasn't a good experience for me when I realized that I had postponed my obedience, and that had led to me ultimately just disobeying. God is letting His people know. These people, His children, His possession. Why did you do this? Think carefully about your ways. What I want to do for a few minutes as we close today is I want to call us to a time of prayer, to a time of reflection, just quietly in your own seats here. And I want you to do this. I want you to ask God to reveal to you any ways in your life to where this has been the reality. Ways in which you put your own priorities, your own comforts, your own desires ahead of what God has called you to do. Now, I want you to ask God to make that known to you. Now, that's honestly kind of scary thought. The reality is that we've probably done this more than we like to think. The reality is I've done this as your pastor at times. It's where I put my own family or my own comforts or my own home or the own desires in my heart ahead of leading the church. And for that, I have to ask your forgiveness. I've done this in my own personal life. Different times in my life where there have been things where I knew that God was leading me to do, and I just wouldn't do it right then. Sometimes out of pure rebellion, sometimes out of fear, sometimes out of me not understanding the voice of the Lord clear enough. Not because He hadn't made it clear, but because I didn't even recognize the voice of the Lord at times. Or at times that I did, and I thought, well, that's good, and God, I'm going to do that. I know that I need to do that, and I will do that, but just not yet, God. God, I'm going to share the gospel with my neighbor, with this person that I see, my friend or my family member. I'm going to, but not tonight. Not this time. When the time is right. God, when you make the time right for me, I will tell them the truth about your Son Jesus. I'll ask him to church. I'll invite him to church at the right moment, at the right time. If I get that right meeting, when everything comes together, I'll invite them. And it could be a myriad of things that the Lord has called you to do that maybe you just weren't willing to do because it wasn't the right time. It didn't fit with your past experiences. It didn't fit with what you wanted to do. It didn't fit with your understanding of the church. It didn't fit with your own theology, or it didn't fit with just what you want. Israel said, we'll do it. So when we have this time of prayer, I want you to ask this. I want you to ask God to reveal to you ways in which, in your own life, maybe currently, or maybe in the past, where you said, God, I'll do it. All right. Ways in which you put your own self, your own comforts, your own desires, priority over God's. Then, when you do it, when He reveals that to you, whether it's in this moment or later on this afternoon, or this week, what are you going to do? I'm thanking you for those that delayed before God. Repent of those, confess those before God. I've sinned in this way, and God, I'm doing it. I wasn't doing it because of this, and I was wrong, God, I'm doing it. What do you want me to do right now, God, I'm doing it? So let's do that. I'm going to have some music playing. Stephen's going to have some music playing just to have a little break in silence. And after a few moments, I will call us out of that. I will close us in a word of prayer, and then Kirsty and Dave will come and sing one last song. I want to ask you to just take a few moments right where you're at right now to bow your head to be alone with the Lord. Ask Him to reveal these things to you. To think carefully about your ways. How the Lord is trying to use you right now at this point in your life. Let's pray.